All right, so welcome again. My name is Sheila Rabin, and I am the ORCID US Community Specialist at Lyrasis, and I provide technical and community support for institutional members of the ORCID US community. And joining us today, we also have Eric Olson, Community Team Specialist at ORCID, and we have 5 guest panelists that I will introduce as we go. We also have Jill Grog online with us from Lyrasis to help answer questions. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and will be made available for future viewing. So we're going to start today with an overview of the ORCID US community, followed by a big picture look at the ORCID initiative globally. Our main focus for this webinar is to showcase current ORCID work at 5 ORCID US community member institutions: the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, New York University, Boston College, Cornell University, and the University of Virginia. If questions arise during the presentation, please type them into the chat and we will make sure to address them towards the end of our time once all panelists have finished presenting. As a quick recap for those who are new to ORCID, ORCID stands for Open Researcher and Contributor ID. And an ORCID ID is a unique 16-digit number assigned to an individual to help with name disambiguation and to connect the individual with a trusted record of their education and employment affiliations, as well as grant funding they've received and works that they have contributed, such as publications, presentations, and more. Institutional systems can be configured to connect with individuals' ORCID records in the ORCID registry to streamline data transfer and information sharing in the research and scholarly communication ecosystem. The ORCID US community provides a national approach to adoption and integration of ORCID for nonprofit research institutions in the United States, with the goal of building a community of practice around ORCID in the US and helping all institutional members get the most value from their ORCID membership. The community was formed in early 2018 as a partnership between the Greater Western Library Alliance, known as GWILA, the Northeast Research Libraries, NURL, the Big Ten Academic Alliance, and Lyrasis. These groups came together to form a national partnership to provide dedicated technical and community support for ORCID member institutions at a substantially reduced rate. Institutional membership in the ORCID US community is $4,300 per calendar year and includes dedicated support, access to 5 ORCID member API credentials, monthly newsletters and statistics reports, and participation in a growing community developing best practices and sharing knowledge in research and scholarly communication management, including access to the ORCID US members-only discussion forum. Lyrasis is the administrative home for the ORCID US community, and any nonprofit research institution in the US may join as a member of the ORCID US community, regardless of existing consortial memberships. More information and details about the ORCID US community can be found online at orcid-us.org. This map shows the geographic distribution of our existing members, and as of September 1st, we have 102 members. As you can see, we have quite a bit more participation on the East Coast, with plenty of room for growth on the West Coast and across the board. The majority of members are in the beginning stages of planning and development for ORCID adoption. About 1/3 of our members have active ORCID integrations, and about 2/3 are doing the planning and active development. ORCID adoption and integration is an iterative process, and with the new ORCID US community structure in place, we're on our way to building a community of practice to go further together with ORCID adoption at research institutions in the US. Now we will hear from Eric Olson from ORCID, who will give a big picture overview of ORCID across the globe.
Thanks, Sheila. And as Sheila mentioned, I'm the engagement and partnerships lead for North America, so the US and Canada, and focus on cultivating the communities in this area, both in terms of just growing the number of participating organizations that work with ORCID and other persistent identifiers, as well as those specific integrations that Sheila has mentioned are growing in our region and all across the Americas. We're growing very quickly, and to the point that this image was prepared about a month or so ago, and we've seen a lot of growth even since then. Um, we're at over 275 members actually now, and this is the Americas altogether. And here we can see the breakdown of the consortia. Like the ORCID US community, we have 4 total consortia in the Americas region, 18 globally. In the Americas, we have the ORCID US community, as well as the Health Research Alliance, which is a consortium made up of nonprofit funders. Those are both in the US. The ORCID Canada consortium works similarly to how the ORCID US community does. They have over 35 members in Canada. And then there's also one in Brazil with 5 members currently. And as Sheila mentioned, that just in the consortia itself, there's about 50 integrations that are either completed or getting near completion. That's about half of the consortium members, which is a really good number, and with many, many more either in development or about to launch, which is great growth in our region over the past year to 6 months. And just briefly mentioning the membership by sector refers to where our members live, since we have members in all sectors of research and scholarly communication. About 65% in this region, 65% of those members are from research institutions like universities and labs and other research centers. Let me move my slide here. There we go. And just a little bit more on the context of what ORCID is doing outside of the region and all around the world. We hit I think we will hit 5.2 million IDs. These are unique IDs registered by individuals this week, which is a huge growth over the past year and a half. We're at 912 members as of last week globally. And again, that's members from all sectors of research, from funders and publishers and research institutions. And in terms of integrations, there are over 560 systems that have integrated institutions that have ORCID integrations, and over 500 of those are unique systems, many that overlap, but also many that are unique and were developed by those institutions for use in their organization specifically. And the majority of our members joined through consortia like the ORCID US community. I think we're about 2/3 of them have joined through the consortia, and as mentioned before, we got 18 of them currently, and several more that we expect to be to launch within the next year. Oh. Can't get the slide to advance here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'm going to hand it back to you, Sheila.
Great, thank you, Eric. Next up, we're going to dive into our case studies at our institution. So we're going to hear from Barry Hayes from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill.
Hello from North Carolina's Hurricane Alley, folks. As Sheila mentioned, I'm Barry Hayes. I'm the Bioinformatics and Research Data Librarian at UNC Chapel Hill. I'm going to tell you a bit about the library's activities as part of UNC's ORCID integration so far. So UNC initiated its ORCID integration in fall 2016 when the UNC Office of Research decided to purchase an ORCID membership and asked the libraries to take the lead in ORCID communications and outreach to campus. We formed an ORCID team within the libraries and began our planning in early 2017. And then when the next budget year rolled around, the Office of Research purchased an ORCID membership through NERL, the NERL Consortium, in the summer of 2017. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so since UNC became an ORCID member so recently, the integration path ORCID, as having institutions follow, had changed from the beginning due to issues with duplicate ORCID records inadvertently being created. ORCID moved away from batch loading researchers for ORCID IDs and moved to this collect and connect model, which you all are probably pretty familiar with. So UNC and other member institutions who will be talking here, I think, have mostly set up locally authenticated ORCID portal pages that direct researchers to connect to ORCID, to create a login if they don't have one, or connect their login, their ORCID ID to their institutional ID, or in our case, the UNC PID. And that connection process is facilitated by tokens that are passed in the transaction between the local institution's portal and the ORCID site. So in communications and outreach about UNC's ORCID initiative, UNC is taking an opt-in approach. We're highly encouraging faculty, staff, and student researchers to use the UNC ORCID portal to register for an ORCID and connect their ORCID ID to UNC, but we have no institutional requirement. And we're approaching this as a slow grow process and anticipate that as publishers and funders integrate and increasingly require ORCID in their systems, that researchers will adopt ORCID. And as UNC integrates ORCID into our internal research and identity systems, researchers will be increasingly incentivized to link their ORCID IDs to the institution. So some initial partners in our efforts have been several units of our Office of Research. Besides funding UNC's ORCID membership, the Office of Research published promotional pieces in their unit newsletters, including the newsletter that comes out monthly from our Vice Chancellor for Research's office. Other initial key partners have been the UNC Scholarly Communications librarians, who have participated on the ORCID outreach team and helped keep the team's work connected to larger scholarly communication activities on campus. Oop. All right, let me get away from that. Key activities over the past 18 months have included creating a timeline for ORCID at UNC implementation phases, developing a communications plan as part of that timeline, reaching out to groups that can partner and help us in this effort, preparing talking points and several slide decks of different links for public services librarians to use in talking with faculty, updating our ORCID lab guide and other guides and web content related to ORCID, creating a one-page handout on ORCID at UNC, which is linked to the ORCID lab guide, piloting the portal with a small group of researchers and refining the language and its activity accordingly, and then also piloting the outreach materials on our library colleagues and refining accordingly. So here's a view of our implementation timeline. In summer 2017, we became the member. We formed an ORCID outreach team, which began preparations for ORCID outreach and integration. In the fall of 2017, while the ORCID portal was being developed, librarians integrated promotion for obtaining an ORCID into presentations and consultations they were already doing. So at that point, we didn't have the portal, but we were still promoting ORCID. And then last spring, we worked with the Office of Research and the Office of Research Information Systems to promote ORCID through their newsletters, as I mentioned, and we launched the new UNC ORCID portal and announced it through those newsletters. This summer and fall, we've ramped up our outreach efforts to researchers, and so far this includes integrating ORCID information and a hands-on sign-up session into our Responsible Conduct of Research course for early stage researchers. That went really well. We added information about ORCID at UNC into new faculty orientation sessions conducted by librarians this fall. We're coordinating with the Scholarly Communications Committee and thinking about events for the fall semester and how to integrate ORCID into those. And we're scheduling with individual departments and schools to make brief presentations at faculty meetings. With input from faculty, we're planning and we'll be piloting sign-up sessions similar to what we did with the RCR course with faculty and others on campus. And then we're also continuing discussions with the Office of Research and others like our institutional repository team about integrating ORCID into local research systems and the IR. So while we've had an ORCID team spearheading the library's ORCID outreach planning, the goal has always been to involve all of our public services librarians in ORCID promotion and outreach. And to that end, the ORCID team has presented and discussed ORCID and the outreach and integration plans with UNC Library staff and administrators throughout this process. That began with a brief announcement at an all-staff meeting back in last fall. We conducted a connect-a-thon with the scholarly communications librarians for librarians and anybody else who was interested, but it was largely targeted at librarians to get them engaged. We've presented to a number of internal committees and groups of involved with our public services units. And we, in last February, we had a dedicated meeting once the portal was ready for all public services librarians across the multiple UNC libraries to sort of educate them about the outreach effort and provide them with the materials that we developed so that they could begin scheduling meetings and talking to their faculty. So this is our ORCID swag. We kept it simple with pens and pins. The ORCID pins have our ORCID portal short URL on them and have proven to be a handy giveaway to help researchers get to the portal and create and link their ORCID ID to UNC. We've also asked the public services librarians that we educated in that session in the spring to wear their pins that we gave them when they meet with faculty. The pins have actually proven to spark questions from researchers and others, which has led to an opportunity to talk about ORCID, and in several cases led to that researcher visiting the portal and creating and linking their ORCID to UNC. These are some statistics that we have so far. We have not done as much outreach as we'd anticipated. We've had kind of an understaffing staffing situation, and but we're coming back from that, and we're also looking at how to standardize how we gather stats about ORCID outreach across the libraries. As of August 1st, you can see we have 5,378 ORCID records that have a unc.edu address attached to them. Most are not linked to the portal. The internal portal tracks how many people have linked their ORCIDs to UNC, and at this point we have 156, and we hope to grow that a lot more this year. In our health sciences library, we actually tracked our ORCID interactions this year, and that gives you a brief synopsis of who we talked to and how many of them we talked to. And our goals for this year are to, as I said, significantly increase the UNC-linked ORCID IDs count and standardize how we collect the ORCID outreach statistics across all of our libraries. And then finally, just say a little bit more about the team. We have 5 librarians from across our libraries, from the Health Sciences Library, the main graduate library, Davis Library, and also our Keenan Sciences Library. We've set up this Office 365 mailbox that anyone can mail to get to the team with questions or assistance, and that's the link to our guide. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much, Barry. All right, so next up, we're going to hear from Stuart Spohr at the New York University.
Okay, I hope you all can hear me. This is going to be a somewhat divided. Let's see. Do I have? Yeah, this is going to be a somewhat divided presentation. I'm at the medical center, and NYU is quite a large institution, so I reached out to Nicholas Wolf down at Washington Square, and he provided me with some slides for their part of their ORCID initiative. Any mistakes I make in presenting that are mine and not his. Basically, we have Washington Square campus is large, 50,000 students, hundreds of departments, schools, institute, no centralized authorities taking control of persistent IDs or anything like that. Makes it for a very challenging environment, just lots of people and not much central control. Nevertheless, they have been pushing through jawbone, basically, reaching out to the research data management classes, through one-to-one outreach, that sort of thing, and have been reasonably effective, I think, at getting people to at least be aware of what ORCID is. We don't have any statistics for how deep the penetration is or like that. The Med Center, on the other hand, is a smaller group of people, about 7,300 active faculty. We have a sophisticated database of faculty publications where we actively attempt to manage, to track everything our faculty publishes. We don't quite reach that, but we try. We have an intense interest because of that faculty publications database in improving author faculty name matching. ORCID is our main hope in the long run of making that really work seamlessly. We are also interested in harvesting publications by ORCID ID to feed that in-house database. So we've been doing a lot of jawboning too. Every time a faculty member has a new publication added to the faculty database, they get a message, and if they haven't already joined ORCID, they are urged to repeatedly. We've done 2 mass emailings, nudging the faculty to join, and it's been reasonably successful. As of today, about 28% have faculty of our faculty have ORCID IDs, but close to 50% of the faculty who've published in the last 3 years. Harvesting from using ORCID is still a sideshow. We're hoping that more and more publishers and ANI databases will start making the ORCID ID an integral part of retrieval. That's not happening in a complete way yet, but it is beginning to happen. And that's pretty much the story. I'd be happy to answer detailed questions, anybody who has them at the end. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Stuart. Next up, we will hear from John O'Connor from Boston College.
Okie doke. Let's see. Oh, okay, here we go. I've got it now. Hi, everyone. My name's John O'Connor. I'm from Boston College. I'm the scholarly communications librarian here, and along with Kimberly Kowal, we have run the ORCID implementation at Boston College. Our implementation has looked very similar to UNC Chapel Hill's, which is good because if you listen to everything they did, we did it as well for the most part. and you are caught up to where we are. So the one thing that I want to show off here is our faculty annual reporting system, which is Faculty 180 or Data 180. We use those terms interchangeably. And this is what it looks like at Boston College. And I want to show how faculty members can use ORCID to pull works from their ORCID profiles into their annual reports, which makes filling them out much less of a hassle for them, which is really the primary carrot that we use when we go to faculty and ask them to create or connect an ORCID. So this is the system, and what they do is when they log in, they see this screen, and they'll go ahead and click on that Vitas and Bios Sketches link there, and that just sends them to this page here. And you can see here that there's this Create or Connect Your ORCID ID, and if they click that, they're taken to this page where they can either sign into an ORCID if they've already created one, or they can create one from here as well. But most people who are using this have already created an ORCID. And essentially what this is asking for is Faculty 180, that software, to be able to see and pull information from their ORCID profiles. In addition, they can click this institutional account login here. And that allows them to log in to their ORCID using their Boston College credentials. So rather than having to remember a separate email address and password for ORCID, they just remember their single sign-on from Boston College. And if they already sign into that sometime in the day, then they're always signed into ORCID. So let's say that they go and sign in. They're presented with this screen one time and one time only, giving Faculty 180 the right to read their profile. They click Authorize, and that's it. So you can see here they've got an ORCID ID sitting in Faculty 180. And from here, they would go and they would click Import. And they can see, it'll show a list of all of the works that are on their particular profile. In this case, there's just one on my profile. And you can see here that they can choose to click sort of one or just a few. This is another good example where they could choose to import employment history, which we do ask them to collect, educational history. They can import some or all or just a few, and they would import the selected ones. They're going to get essentially what looks like a confirmation, and they'll click Save. And then you'll see this successfully added result. And so it's already imported, and it'll stay imported into the Faculty 180 system forever. So for example, if an article, I don't know, for some reason the abstract were to change or something like that, or the journal title would change, which does happen on occasion. Those sorts of things would be updated year to year to year for the annual reports. And it's good because in previous years, we've gotten some pretty questionable data when faculty have entered these things themselves, but when we get to pull them directly from ORCID profiles, then obviously we're getting sort of verified metadata. So that's all that I have, and I will go ahead and turn it back over to Sheila.
Excellent, thank you, John. Next up, we are going to hear from Simeon Warner from Cornell University.
Hi, Sheila. Hi, everyone. As Sheila said, I'm Simeon Warner. I'm Director of Library Linked Data and Repository Architecture at Cornell University. Cornell is a founding member of ORCID, and we're committed to the ORCID vision, where we have a world where all who participate in research, scholarship, and innovation are uniquely identified and connected. We believe that is good for research and scholarship itself. It's also well aligned with a number of library goals, and we hope that by connecting systems and reusing data, we can eventually help reduce effort on researchers, for example, as we just heard in the Boston presentation. The library at Cornell is not very directly involved in the collection of faculty assessment data, but we hope to help our colleges. I'm going to talk about two things. First, a brief diversion into ORCID at archive.org, which is, of course, run and operated by Cornell University. And then I'll talk about things within the library. So going back to archive, we introduced local author identifiers in the pre-ORCID era, which seems a long time ago now, back in 2009. And we thought we were going along pretty well with something like 15,000 local author IDs created, claimed, and reconciled in the first 6 years. That's about 2,500 a year. Somewhere in early 2015, and I noticed the time axis appears cut off on my slide here, we introduced the ability to instead connect to an ORCID ID. And that's the switch over from the big blue portion of that graph to the green portion. And you can see here in early 2016, there was a green portion going up very rapidly. And I'm pleased to say that that initial rapid adoption of ORCID has continued to this date. So Archive now has about 53,000 author identity connections to ORCID IDs, which is a growth of about 6,000 a year. And I think that shows some sort of understanding among the archive user community that a universal identifier, one they're going to use in many systems, is rather better than just a local identifier. So Archive has now essentially deprecated the local identifiers and relies instead on an ORCID-based identifier, where, for example, here's my author page on Archive, which lists directly the articles associated with me on archive.org, and of course links off to my ORCID record, which might have a larger set of records elsewhere. So now, ORCID at Cornell excluding archive. I think, as we've seen before in earlier presentations, we have a LibGuide as the primary entry point for our patrons regarding information about ORCID. It attempts to outline the benefits, give a number of how-to instructions, and provide a contact point which goes to a set of people to help answer questions. I'll note in passing that several years ago, we implemented an ORCID connection for the Vivo researcher profile system. This code is still part of the Vivo code base and is used at other institutions, but at Cornell we've moved away from a self-edited Vivo instance, so it's not currently live where we are. As I said, we don't, within the library, directly work with the collection of faculty reporting information, but that's instead a responsibility of the colleges at Cornell. We've been working with the CALS, the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences, to help them use ORCID as part of their faculty reporting. This tied to work we did to use the ORCID Connect program to connect our local identities, what we call net IDs at Cornell, via our institution-wide Shibboleth login to ORCIDs. So we have some instructions here as part of our LibGuide, and I'm just going to run through some of the elements that are perhaps slightly different from the slides we've already seen on institutional connection. So just a view of the status so far. If we look at the total number of ORCIDs, the green line at the top, connected to a star cornell.edu, so that includes the medical school as well as the college in Ithaca, we have around 6,000 ORCID IDs with a Cornell email. We have approximately 631 associations through this authenticated workflow with the central identity system. These are mostly, apologies for my typo there, within the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences and the library, which I think is a clear indication that without direct promotion, these being the two places where we have done a lot of promotion work, there will not be a huge amount of uptake. So the process that we have to make this connection and record it within our system follows the usual institutional login that we've already seen. But when that institutional login has gone through, the ORCID profile that the researcher is then logged into shows this big yellow box offering the opportunity to connect. Hopefully, they will click on that, at which point they get the familiar permissions granting screen. Now, all we're asking for is the permission to get and record the ID as part of this workflow. We are not updating the individual's ORCID records. Hopefully this is not scary and they will accept. And then they will be taken back to a page on the central identity management website, which says that, yes, we have stored your ORCID associated with your single sign-on at Cornell, and talks about how it can be used. Once this has been completed, the individual's ORCID ID is available via our LDAP directory as an EduPerson ORCID attribute, and also potentially available through the In Common Federation, although I don't believe that any service is actually using it yet, so that we can, say, query to get all the ORCIDs associated with our faculty connections. There's a backup plan here in that perhaps when the researcher first logs on and makes this connection, or sorry, makes the institutional login, they don't go through and follow through with connection. At that point, ORCID will send an update, which appears in the ORCID inbox and will potentially generate a notification asking them to connect. And if they were to click on the connecting link there, that would take them back to the workflow at a later date. So it allows us to potentially help make that connection if it hadn't earlier been made. And I think, oh, that looks like that's someone else's already. Okay, over to you, Sheila. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Simeon. And last but not least, we're now going to hear from Sherry Lake from the University of Virginia.
Oops. This is Sherry. Can we go back? Do I have, okay. There we go. Okay. Don't want anyone to see ahead of, okay. Thanks, Sheila. Hi, I'm Sherry Lake. I'm the scholarly repository librarian here at the University of Virginia. And we implemented or integrated ORCID on 2 of our open repositories. We have an ETD, electronic thesis and dissertation repository, as well as an open repository. Both are running on an older version of Samvera, formerly Hydra platform. And so what we've done is we've actually integrated the ORCID button and the ORCID connection through a user's dashboard. So when a UVA authenticated user logs onto one of these 2 systems, they see their dashboard. And unfortunately, my little circle has dropped below the button, but there is a connect or create your ORCID button right there on the dashboard, where they can do that when they first log in or anytime. So if a user at UVA comes in and wants to create or connect their ORCID to our repositories, they click the button and they get the ORCID sign in or ORCID register. One of our repositories is the electronic thesis and dissertation repository, where all graduate students who have degrees that require a thesis or dissertation, they are required to deposit their thesis or dissertation in our repository. And most of those grad students actually do go through this process and register for an ORCID for the first time. So it's really exciting that these young professionals are starting out their careers getting their ORCID ID. So once they either sign in or register, here at UVA, we actually are asking them to read their limited information, but we are also asking for permission to update their ORCID account. Anything that is deposited in one of those two repositories and made publicly available, we then send that metadata onto ORCID. And this is giving, in this case, the institution, the University of Virginia institution, the permission to send things to ORCID. And we sort of made it broad. We weren't saying this repository or that repository, because we hope to add a data repository and other repositories, or maybe a different type of repository, and we didn't want to have to go back and get new permissions. So we just made it generic with the University of Virginia. So once they're connected, their ORCID ID appears there on their dashboard, and they get a confirmation message that their ORCID account was successfully linked. So now UVA, we have their token, so we can, when they publish on our repository, update their ORCID record. Oops, going backwards, okay. So this sort of busy screen, what it is actually doing is, this is their dashboard, and you can see here a mixture of works that are private. And if you look under the ORCID status column, it's blank because it's private. We have not sent anything to ORCID. The next ones in the list say visible worldwide. Those are totally made publicly available. And when they were made publicly available, our system sent the metadata onto ORCID to their ORCID account. And we actually added a status here that says, well, this item is now in ORCID. If ORCID is down, or if ORCID takes a long time to contact or talk back to our system, we have various other statuses. Here we have email Libra, means something went wrong, we're not sure. The word pending could also be there if ORCID's taken a while to answer. So we're trying to update the status and let the user know where their ORCID integration actually is set. If a user or a researcher has not connected their ORCID, so that their ORCID profile box still has the little button to connect, at any time, a faculty member or a user can select that button and connect at later on when they come back to their dashboard. Any public item that was not sent because the connection wasn't made will automatically get sent once that connection authentication through ORCID is made. So it's a matter of, if they've put 4 things, made publicly available, forgot to put the little button, they can always come back and click the button and connect. And anything that's in our repository that ORCID doesn't have, ORCID will send it on their way. We also show the ORCID IDs on our public record. So if a user has authenticated and connected their ORCID with our repository, then whenever you see that author appear on any of our repository items, the ORCID ID appears in the record, the public record. So I'm just going to show you, no one actually has showed the opposite end. So I'm going to show you the behind the scenes. On the ORCID side, this is what a researcher would see on their ORCID record. They would see which items have come from the University of Virginia. So those are the items that they have made publicly available in our repositories that we have sent on to ORCID. You may notice that the second and third item here have more than one source. The University of Virginia, we also assign DOIs to every record, every item. And if a researcher on their ORCID account had gone in and done the export from data site, they would get duplicate records. And of course, ORCID lets you choose which record you want to be the preferred source, whether you want the data site source, which is my second record here, to be the preferred source, or if you want in the third one here, University of Virginia is my preferred source. So it's okay to have duplicate records in ORCID, and this is how a researcher can actually deal with those. I wanted to point out that the ORCID is actually what we call a microservice at the University of Virginia. So is our DOI generator. The microservice that talks to ORCID and to our repositories are separate from our repositories, the DOI also as well. That way we can make use of this ORCID integration, talking to ORCID, handing off metadata, authentication, independent of any software. So if we ever decide not to use our Samvera or to go to a different platform, we would just take out the repository server, put a new one in, and hopefully the ORCID integration would still work because of the microservices. That's all from the University of Virginia. Thanks.
Great, thank you, Sherry, and thank you again to all of our panelists for these great case studies. So to wrap up real quickly, I would like to just point out some of our ORCID US community resources that are available online. As I mentioned previously, the ORCID US community website is available at orcid-us.org. And there you can find more information about the community, membership, and additional resources. We also have a listserv that is open to anyone. You don't have to be a member of the ORCID US community to join the ORCID US listserv. And that listserv link is available from the website as well. And as I mentioned also, we have a members discussion forum. So if you are a representative from one of our member institutions, you can join this members discussion forum where we'll be sharing information and best practices. And we also have a Twitter account. So please feel free to follow us at US Consortium and stay tuned for more announcements there as well. And I do want to also mention that the recording of this webinar and the slides will be made available shortly after we finish today. Everyone who registered will receive that those links, and we will also be putting a link to the recording on the website. So I think now it's time, if anyone has any questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat, and we'll give you a few minutes to do that typing and see if we can answer any questions. We still have plenty of time on our schedule, so please do not be shy and type in some questions. All right, so I see a question coming in. If an institution does not have any systems to integrate or the ability to do so, what are the benefits of institutional ORCID membership? So one of the primary benefits of membership is the ability to integrate your systems with the ORCID registry and be able to do that communication. But you don't necessarily have to be a member to do the kind of outreach to your faculty and students and affiliated researchers to encourage them to create and use their ORCID ID. But as time goes on, we're seeing more and more vendor systems, for example, building in support for ORCID functionality. And in those cases, if you are using a vendor system that supports ORCID, you would need to become an ORCID member to get your API credentials to plug into that system and turn on the functionality. So it really does kind of depend case by case on what systems you're using. And if you would like to get kind of a more in-depth consultation on the specifics of your institution, you can feel free to send us an email and we can work with you on that. Let's see, we've got some other questions here. Oh, this one is, oh, Sherry is saying, is it safe to assume that UVA does not use the ProQuest filing administrator?
Hi, Sherry. That is correct. UVA, the library, nor the departments use the ProQuest at all. If a student wants their dissertation or thesis in ProQuest, it's all on the student to actually get that in. So that is not a requirement from their department or school, and the library does not do that. That's true.
Thank you, Sherry. Okay, next question. For the initial setup, as with the first speaker, how long a time frame should be planned for doing the pre-public work at a large research university? So in terms of getting all the stakeholders together and doing planning for launching maybe an outreach initiative and figuring out first steps with the integration. Do any of our panelists have advice on time frame for that planning?
This is Barry from UNC. I can speak to what seemed to work well for us. We, as you saw from the slides, took about a year to do our implementation, taking basically a semester to do planning and preparation, and then through the summer, and then building the portal in the fall, and then so the following year launching the portal and beginning sort of public outreach. I think through that year you can be building those relationships with key stakeholders on campus who would be helpful to help you with that outreach and promotion effort on campus, such as tenure and promotion committees and that sort of thing.
Great, thanks Barry. Oh, I see a question that I had skipped over previously. What is the best sequence of implementation in your opinion? What would you do first, second, third, etc. if you had to do it over again? Any panelists want to jump in on the recommended sequence of implementation looking back over your experience?
Well, here at UVA, I'll just sort of jump in. We took the technical approach because we didn't have the capacity to do any, I guess, outreach. So we knew we had our graduate students who were required to put into our repository. We had their attention, so we sort of started with that, with the technical abilities, and now we're going to do the opposite and do outreach. So that was just how it worked for us.
Great. Does anyone else want to chime in on that one?
This is Simeon from Cornell, and I think the answer to the question is probably strongly dependent upon the environment. I think in all of these things, the hardest message is always to the researchers about why they either have to or should be incentivized to do what you're asking of them, because they're always very careful of their time. So I think perhaps the biggest gating function is to think carefully before contacting them about what you're asking and the explanation of why you're asking it.
Great, thanks, Simeon. Okay, so next question. I'm at a small teaching-focused institution. I've had a hard time selling an institutional membership to our Office of Research and Sponsored Programs, who is recommending academia.edu to faculty. What ideas do you have for explaining why the cost is worth it? So with this question about essentially selling the institutional membership to your institution, there are resources available online kind of explaining and doing that kind of internal outreach to your internal stakeholders. But essentially, do any of our panelists want to jump in there? Because I can just keep going. But essentially, in terms of those kinds of ideas, showing, like we showed today in this webinar, examples of other institutions that are ORCID members and that are using ORCID actively at their institution can be a good starting point. A big point about using the ORCID member API is that you can have the ability to access information that researchers might have on their ORCID record that they've set to trusted parties only. So it's not necessarily public information, but if your institution was to connect with them, your institutional systems would be able to read that information. Your institution would be able to have control over the way the institutional name is appearing on ORCID records. And there are a list kind of other points that can be used to essentially explain the benefits of membership to your internal stakeholders. And if you go to our ORCID-US.org website, on the membership page, you can see a bulleted list of the benefits that come with membership. And any more detailed or nuanced questions specific to the context of your institution, I can help you answer those if you send an email to orcidus@lyrasis.org. But I do also want to mention on that question that joining as an ORCID member through the ORCID US community, because we have such a large number of institutions, the membership fee is the lowest possible fee for becoming an ORCID member. So that is a plus. All right, let's see. Have any of the campuses received negative feedback from faculty about registering for an ORCID ID? And what are their objections to registering? Anyone from the panel?
This is Stuart at NYU. I can respond to that, I think. The answer is no. Nobody has complained. There are a lot of people who haven't followed through, and we can't look into their minds and see why they haven't followed through, but I can't help but believe that time and handling very demanding grant and publication and research activities isn't a major part of it.
Thanks, Stuart. Does anyone else on the panel have something to share regarding potential negative feedback from faculty about using ORCID?
Hi, this is Sherry. I guess one thing that comes to my mind is that we actually are not making them use ORCID. So by doing the outreach, you're encouraging them. So I think it's just one less thing that they have to do, but it's a good thing to do. So maybe it's the way that we're presenting it that's helpful.
Good point. Thanks, Sherry.
This is Barry from UNC. I would chime in on Sherry's point and also say that UNC is doing it the same way, sort of opt-in. But what we have received are questions, and it sort of alludes back to the former question about using academia.edu. We have a large number of our faculty who are already using Google Scholar, for example. And I think one of the strengths of ORCID that Google Scholar doesn't necessarily have, and I'm not sure about academia.edu. I'm more familiar with ResearchGate, but it's the goal of ORCID to be authoritative in terms of validating both the researcher's identity, have the institution validate their affiliation, have the publishers or the publication holder validate the publication listing that's in that record, as opposed to an account that is pulling things off the web or in other ways not necessarily doing it, the curation, I guess, to validate that a particular work is associated with a particular person. And that to me seems to be one of the strengths of ORCID over other systems like that.
Great. Anyone else on this question about feedback from faculty?
Yeah, I'll just say that, as Simeon from Cornell, in some earlier iterations of material that was distributed to the College of Agriculture and Life Sciences faculty, I think there wasn't enough to explain what they were going to expect, especially with the process of the connection with our login. There's this idea of getting bounced backwards and forwards between ORCID and our local identity management site. And I think screenshots proved to be very useful in sort of, this is what you should expect. You know, don't be scared. This is what will happen. And I think that was very helpful.
Thanks, Simeon. Okay, let's see. Now we do have a question directly for Cornell. So Simeon, in integrating with NetID Shibboleth, at what point did you bring your identity management people on board with the ORCID implementation planning process?
So we had already done some other work with ORCID, notably the archive work early on. But as soon as we had the idea that this might be a possibility, we started to have a discussion with them. We really weren't sure what their reaction would be. So we really posed it initially as a question, you know, is this something we should think about? And it turned out that actually they were quite supportive. They were also helpful in having a sort of three-way conversation between ORCID technical staff, the library, and them to understand exactly what was going on as this was being developed. So early is the answer.
Great, thanks, Simeon. And now we have a question for the panelists, and we're wondering if anyone is actually asserting institutional affiliations regarding either employment or education. We did see that University of Virginia is writing works information, publication information to ORCID records, but is anyone writing education or employment information to ORCID records?
Hey, this is John from Boston College. We do write employment information to records, but incredibly broad. We only write that they work for Boston College, and that's more or less it. We had discussions about writing things like titles and departments, or even hire date, and sort of decided not to do that just because of how politically sensitive those things can be, especially things like title. Those can, you know, people can consider themselves one thing, and even though in an HR system, which is where we're drawing our information from, there's something else. People can consider themselves to be in multiple departments. How do we manage things like visiting faculty that are, maybe only here for a year and just happen to use our system? Would we really consider them, employees in that sense? I mean, certainly for that year they are, but would we want to differentiate them in some way? So essentially, we basically just write that they work for Boston College, and that's it. We would like to write education as well. And that's sort of on the roadmap, but just have not gotten there.
Great, thank you, John. Would anyone else like to speak to this question? Okay. Are there any further questions at this time? Okay. There's a comment about, I understand that it is very difficult to wean people off ResearchGate, for example. The difference we communicate to faculty is that there are no preservation components to those commercial proprietary systems that can disappear at any point and don't necessarily have academic values. Okay. Yeah, ResearchGate has come up a few times, and ORCID is different from ResearchGate for sure.
So if I may add, I think also academia.edu and ResearchGate are tackling only one part of the big picture. A key differentiator of ORCID is that it's an identity intended to travel through workflows in the scholarly world. So it's only an ORCID ID that will be asked for when a researcher submits to a journal, and that will then automatically flow through the publication process, be registered in the Crossref database, and then automatically ensure an accurate recording of that article with the researcher without any further work. And I think we're only just beginning to see the benefits of that workflow, but the fact that ORCID is engaged in these workflows is really a key differentiator.
Good point, Simeon. Thank you. Any additional questions? Well, if questions do come up, like I said, feel free to send an email to this email address that you see here on the slide, and we can make sure to answer your questions. And also, again, on our website, we have a Get Involved page that lists the ORCID US listserv, and also other upcoming webinars and events and things that we have going on. So definitely check that out. And if there are no further questions, then we can go ahead and conclude. And I would just like to, again, thank all of the panelists and thank all of the attendees as well. And we will talk again maybe at a future webinar. So thank you, everyone, and have a great day.